This week I was wiring up an API call and I hit one of those moments where backend engineer suddenly feels very strange. Um, I had to send an authorization header. The value seems a completely gibberish value that gets generated, and for 5 seconds my brain went, this should be secure enough. Um, the thing is, it's not. So, today we'll talk about what basic auth is, what username, password, and how we actually set up a basic auth, why we need to encode it in the first place, and the tiny moment where my beginner trap went from actually being a complete chaos of why I need to do things to sudden clarity in terms of what's authorization versus authentication, what basic auth really is, and why basic auth is not really security, though it sounds security-ish. Right. So for those of you who are watching me, I'm Pravina. I'm an ex senior product manager, and I'm um, on this journey of becoming an AI engineer, building 6 apps from app 1 to app 6. App 1 being a very basic AI wrapper, with and app 6 being an autonomous AI agent. Follow me in this journey, subscribe to my channel, and as I said, let's talk about authentication and authorization. So, first, the terminology. Um, Authentication is who are you and can you identify yourself, right? So, this is literally um, can you enter or can you not? So, it's as simple as do I know you, right? Authorization is what I call as are you eligible to do something. So if I log you in and you're monkey one, right, that's authentication, and I know you're monkey one, you're gotten through the gates, that's authentication. um, but if a system is checking, is monkey one actually allowed to delete users, can they see billing information, can they change some things, that is authorization. Except what I've found out today as I was wiring up my first API is HTTP very confusingly calls. Um, um, so when you call an API, you have to um, authenticate an API, because even an API needs to know, is this caller of an API a legitimate caller. Interestingly, they pass this in the header, but the header actually wants you to pass this as an authorization. So this is a fake authentication. So though you pass an HTTP header as an authorization, it is indeed an authentication. So what are some of the type of auth? So I'm just going to call it auth N and auth Z. Auth N is authentication and authorization is auth Z. So for the rest of this video, let's just talk about authentication, which is just telling can I allow you in or not, right? So the first type of auth that I came across today was basic auth. So basic auth is a type of HTTP authentication. It sounds it is a bit basic actually, because it's really simple. All it does is the API provider, right? So in my example, I'm using Data for SEO, which is an external API provider. They have a user ID and password that they give you when you sign up, and you pay money for it, and they track usage, right? And all the HTTP RFC document says is you need to pass a header with the exact word authorization as the name. Value becomes basic, which is the type of authentication that you're doing, right? It's just a user ID and password is a basic. So you say basic and then you say user ID colon password. But you don't pass the user ID and password colon password as a string as it is. The reason for that is it expects it to convert it into ASCII safe characters in the header. And that's what we do. We do what we call as a base64 encoding. So that's what's expected. So regardless of whichever API web servers that you're using to build, whether it's Python or Java or any other language, every web API call, and even for any LLM calls that you're making, you are if it's using a basic authentication, you are expected to pass a base64 encoded user ID colon password. So now almost always when I see the base64 encoding, and again, not being a cryptography person, not knowing anything about um, security as much, right? The first thing that I see this and I say, oh, okay, this looks like it's unbreakable, it's a cipher, it's a code, it's so secure. But really, base64 encoding is not encryption, right? So I think that's like probably the biggest takeaway of this video. So think about it like this, right? So base64 encoding, if you're doing a HTTP call to any external API, and you're passing a header, literally anyone can actually get your user ID and password, and they can just use your API ID and passwords for free. So don't do that, right? So HTTPS, which is a secure transport mechanism, is what actually protects the end-to-end journey of your API. This is just a simple, really simple encoding, right? So yeah, so the protection actually happens on HTTPS. HTTPS encrypts this request while it's traveling over the network. So the clean mental model that I've built for myself when I was building my first endpoint is base64. It just changes the format of data that I'm passing. I need to have a basic authentication as a header. Um, um, with user ID colon password, which is base64. HTTPS is the one that does the protection, not the base64 encoding. So very different jobs. So then the other bit, which might be again bit confusing, is why is authorization header called as an authorization header when it's in fact doing authentication, right? So so HTTP in general has different kinds of authentication. I've just discovered one so far in depth. um, and we what we've discovered and talked about is what we call as basic auth, where here are the credentials and I'm presenting you this request in the body with this authentication, can I please do something, right? um, there are other forms, like when you go to a music festival, they give you a kind of a um, bracelet that you can go in and out with. So that's what a token is. That's also a type of an authentication, which is not a basic authentication. And there's some more like OAuth and few other ones, which will probably come too late, right? So though it feels like the naming decision was probably done around 1994 or sometime, I don't know. It seems it's a bit irritating, but the bottom line is it is just authentication. So yeah, so let me just flip now and then show you a quick Python view of how my base64 encoded strings actually look like, and how you could set up an HTTP basic authentication as an authorization in your request. So it's just literally one line of code. I have a method called as define a basic auth token, which simply gets and returns an f string with the login colon the password, and I'm just first encoding this to UTF-8. And this is again another small learning for me, which is I can't do a base64 encoding directly because a base64 encoding requires bytes, and I cannot send a string directly to it. So I have to first encode it to UTF-8 and then encode again to base64, which then gives me the actual ASCII specific version of this token that can be sent. And going back to the header itself, this is what we talked about. So my header object is simply an authorization with a f string, again a basic, and then it just has my complete token here, which is again, if you know ASCII, it is just like characters with our A to Z, 0 to 9 and so forth, right? So it just converts that into something that is safe for HTTP headers. Thank you, and I will see you in the next one where I'm excited to just run you through the very first endpoint where we are building uh, the free qualification for our prospecting for SEO. So, see you in the next one.